Welcome to Our Hope, a production of Chosen People Ministries.
Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 through 20. Ever since Yeshua gave the Great Commission to his disciples, his message of hope and redemption has spread throughout the world, and people have used all kinds of ways to share it. For Chosen People Ministries, which began in 1894, we have used the radio, television, pamphleting, newspaper ads, and now, in this digital age, online ads to show the love of Messiah with God's chosen people. Over the years, we have learned what media works and what does not work for our ministry. And we have also learned how to work following God's lead in unity with our colleagues. On today's episode, we are looking back on the various ways we have shared the message of Messiah. We will also share some of the lessons we have learned along the way, and we hope you will be encouraged to use what God has given you to reach the world. It is my pleasure to now introduce the host of Our Hope podcast, Abe Vasquez.
Hello everyone, welcome to Our Hope. This is Abe Vasquez. I'm super excited about this episode 50. And today we have Robert Walter, we have Brian Crawford, and we have Nicole Vaca joining me. And we're going to be discussing some exciting things. Hi guys, how are you?
Hey Abe.
Shalom.
Hey, doing great.
Awesome. So we might sound like we're in the studio together, but we're actually all over the country. 3 of us in New York and 1 in California. Thank God for technology that we can do this. And speaking of technology, that's what we're really talking about in this episode. Before we even go there, what kind of episode would this be if we didn't talk about food? Right? So I'm going to ask a very simple question. What do you prefer? And this is food related to New York. Pastrami sandwich or roast beef?
Pastrami all the way.
Yeah, it's not even a question.
Katz's Deli, you get that mile-high stack. It's just, no question.
Yeah, pastrami with some mustard, and if you're at Katz's, I recommend the pastrami Reuben, which is delicious. They put some coleslaw and some melted Swiss cheese and some Russian dressing sandwiched between 2 nicely sliced pieces of rye bread.
Oh, man, they're going to have to start paying us to promote them. That sounds so good.
The real question, though, Robert, is do you share or not? Do you eat that whole thing yourself?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think it depends. It depends, honestly. I think it's best to share because it is such a massive sandwich, and just for the sake of your arteries, it might be in your best interest.
Agreed.
Yeah, Nicole, you and I are in the gluten-free club now, so it does hurt our heart talking about sandwiches.
Indeed. I think I've only tried pastrami once in my life, and it was 1 bite. So I have to try pastrami again.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I think we need to just pause and pray for Nicole.
Yeah, I think so. Well, when you can go there, just get yourself a sandwich, Nicole. Take it out of the bread and enjoy the meat, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. We're really excited to celebrate or commemorate our 50th episode of Our Hope. I think it's a big deal. We really launched this podcast, as a result of the pandemic. We felt people needed hope. Nicole, do you want to share a little bit more about why we chose this episode to talk about this topic?
Yeah, so, it is the 50th episode, and so I wanted to do something a little different, a little special. I wanted to give people kind of an inside look at what we do and how we share this message with the world and how it has changed over time, and also just a behind the scenes look at kind of our work process and hopefully inspire some creators who are listening.
That's great. That's awesome. So Robert, Brian, when did you join CPM?
So I came on staff initially in January of 2007.
Wow.
But didn't officially become full-time until January of 2010. So it's been a little while.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And I came on board in 2010 as well. And Robert was actually one of my first phone calls after I came on staff, because he had just gotten to New York City and I was planning on making my way there. But I didn't actually touch feet on the ground of New York and begin full-time ministry until 2011.
That's awesome. And I'm assuming at the time when you joined, some of the stuff that we're doing now wasn't really put into practice back then. Is that fair to say? So stuff on social media, stuff on the digital side of things.
Yeah, we weren't really doing that kind of thing back in 2010, 2011. When I first got to New York, we were in the middle of a major campaign called the Isaiah 53 campaign, and we had billboards and we had subway ads and bus station ads, and we had those ads all over New York City, and then we moved those ads to other cities throughout the country, and that was one of the major things that we were doing at the time.
Yeah, and I think that the Isaiah 53 campaign in particular was sort of the emblematic campaign that saw us transition from doing a lot of stuff in print and then transitioning to the internet. So it was a really important campaign, honestly.
Yeah, tell us about that campaign. What was the heart of that campaign?
So Dr. Mitch Glaser, the president of the ministry, he wrote a book called Isaiah 53 Explained, which is a very evangelistic presentation that Jesus is the suffering servant of Isaiah 53. And it's written in such a way where it's coming from one Jewish person to another Jewish person. Yeah. Very relatable and a very effective, honestly, presentation of the gospel. So as the book was coming out, we wanted to distribute it and get it in front of as many Jewish people as possible. So like Brian mentioned, we had these huge billboards in Times Square, at the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel. We had a full page ad in the New York Times.
Wow.
And it was really, it was pretty substantial.
It's interesting. Before I came on to Chosen People Ministries in 2015, and I remember that billboard at the end of Lincoln Tunnel. And so I remember seeing, you can't miss it. So that was 5 years before I came to CPM, and I remember that. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that ad in the New York Times, it basically just printed the entire chapter of Isaiah 53 on a full page ad and then had a phone number down at the bottom. And that was the ad.
Just let people read it for themselves.
Yeah, we just wanted people to read it for themselves.
Wow.
That is awesome. A question for you, Brian. What are some of the more traditional ways for sharing the message of Yeshua, the Messiah?
Yeah, in Chosen People, probably the most traditional way is through our congregational ministry, where we share the message of Yeshua through preaching, teaching, celebrating the holidays. That's a place where both believers and unbelievers can come together and learn more about Yeshua. But the bigger question is, how do we actually get people to come to our congregations? And so there's really been two major ways that we have done evangelism traditionally. It's been face-to-face ministry on one hand, and then media evangelism on the other. And face-to-face ministry, you're probably familiar with it. It's a lot of tract distribution, sometimes street preaching, doing book tables, sometimes door-to-door in neighborhoods where that is agreeable. You can't really do that in some Jewish neighborhoods, particularly in New York City. But you can also do, you can have clipboards with questionnaires and have aids like signboards and whatnot. That's the more face-to-face ministry. And also meeting with Jewish people who we get referrals from. Maybe friends of our ministry who have connected us with their Jewish friends, and then we meet them at a coffee shop or visit them in their home. So that's the face-to-face ministry. But then there's media evangelism. And there's all kinds of ways that we've done media evangelism in the past. since we're 126 plus years old, we have been there and done that when all kinds of new media opportunities have come around. So we were there at the beginning using newspaper and magazines, and then this new thing called the radio came out, and we had to figure out how to use the radio for the gospel. And then you added TV, and that was radio plus an image, and you had to figure out how to not just talk well about the gospel, but actually have a full production team behind the scenes, creating sets and having producers. And then we had to figure out how to use the internet, and that is a completely new area of media evangelism for our ministry. But here's the thing: the message never changes, even though the medium might change. And so we have always had to adapt with the times. But Yeshua the Messiah, he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so we never change the gospel. We just package it in new ways and new forms. And that's what's so fun about using these various methods in sharing the gospel.
Right. And honestly, I would add that when we look to the past, like Brian said, we've tried to be at the forefront in the history of our mission in bringing the gospel in new ways as these new ways developed, whether it's the newspaper, whether it's radio, whether it's television, or now the internet and podcasts and short videos on the internet, all kinds of stuff. But we're standing on the shoulders, not just of, those who went before us in this ministry, but even in the scripture. I mean, the Apostle Paul, especially, I think of him in Acts chapter 17. When he showed up in Athens, you see him going into all these different venues to share the gospel. He goes to the synagogues to reason with the Jewish people and with God-fearing Gentiles. Then he's in the marketplace and he's sharing the gospel there. And then he winds up on Mars Hill. And what was he doing? He was going where the people were and using the different mediums, the different platforms as a way to communicate the gospel. And honestly, I mean, we really have an obligation to do this, as faithful stewards of this gospel message that doesn't change, like Brian said. We have an obligation to use all the means that are at our disposal to spread this message.
Yeah, and one is not better than the other. It's and
right.
How do we use all of these methods at the same time to be as effective as possible for that particular method, right?
Right. And we always need to be adapting to the current situation. So, like, for instance, as Robert mentioned, Paul, he would actually be able to go into synagogues and preach about Yeshua from within a synagogue. Mm-hmm. And it's probably not news to anybody listening that is not really a method that is available to us today. And so we can't just look and say, well, Paul did it, we should do that too. We have to adapt. We have to find new ways to share the message. And it may not be the same as what was effective in the first century.
Right. And I think the key principle there from Acts 17 is look at the public square. Where is it possible to get the message out? And that's what Paul was doing. And we look today, and the public square has expanded. It has expanded into the digital realm. So it only makes sense for us to venture into that area as well.
So, Abe, hearing about all these different methods, do we still use any of them today?
I would say yes. We still print tracts. We still print books. We still do a lot of the methods that Brian talked about, the face-to-face ministry for sure. We have our Shalom New York outreach, Shalom Boston, Shalom Philadelphia outreach. We haven't abandoned any of those outreaches because they're still effective. It's still important to our mission to have those specific outreaches. But I'll ask you this question, let's pretend that social media didn't exist. Let's pretend the internet didn't exist. Let's pretend Zoom didn't exist. How would the pandemic have affected ministry without all of those things? Yeah, and that's rhetorical. If somebody wants to answer that, because I don't know the answer to that. I just know it would have made it a lot harder. So it's almost like I want to say thank God for this technology that we were able to stay connected throughout this pandemic. Who knows what would have happened to society had we been cooped up in our homes for a year without any sort of communication other than a phone call or writing a letter. You know? And I mean, we would have been used to it because internet wouldn't have existed, right? But you know, things would have been different for us. And so thinking about today, I mean, we just ran stats for how our digital efforts have gone over the past year, and we had 80,000 attendees go to our virtual events.
Yeah.
80,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
In a pandemic year where people are stuck at home. You know, we were able to reach people that we never thought we'd be able to reach because we leaned in to this pandemic, and we decided, you know what, we're not going to shy away. We're going to double down on this, and we're going to continue to make sure that the gospel goes out wherever it's available. And right now, all that's available is the digital platform. So yeah, it's, you know, yes, we still do those things, and we're going to return to them, you know, in 2022. We're going to go back to the street outreach, which we're excited about. This year, we're bringing back our camp. You know, it's very exciting. But, you know, having the platforms really was incredible this past year. So I have a question for Robert and Brian. As we move forward, as we escape this COVID reality that we're in, what can we learn from our past, both from the traditional methods, our digital methods? You know, what can we learn from all of that? And maybe you have some impact stories in there too.
I think the biggest thing is that we need to be reliant on the Lord for wisdom and creativity and not get too stuck on the old paradigm. It's really easy when something changes to be very skeptical of the change and to not really see the benefits of what could be with the new paradigm. I'm sure that when TV came out, all of the people who were using the radio for ministry saw the TV as a threat, or saw it as something that was scary, saw it as something that we don't know how to do this, and we're comfortable with the radio and we're getting results on the radio. And so they may not have seen the value of using the television. And the same thing can go with the internet. I think that before the pandemic, there were many who were on the fence about online evangelism. And that was definitely my experience 10 years ago when I first came on board. We weren't doing internet evangelism. We weren't doing media evangelism. And so there were very few people in the ministry who had a vision for it or really could even get their mind around it. And now, oh my goodness, we see that this is not the future of the ministry, but it is an integral part of the future of the ministry. So one of the biggest things we need to learn is to be flexible, to see where the Lord is leading and guiding, and to have some openness to be creative with these new things that come our way.
Yeah, so I agree. I think being flexible and pliable and adaptable and faithful to the message. One thing, I don't know if I've learned, but one thing that's sort of been in the back of my mind as we prepare, as we make preparations now to transition back into more of like a hybrid, partially online and more in person, is trying to find a balance. Because I think some people have gotten a little too comfortable with doing everything online. And I think as believers, we need each other. We need to be in each other's presence. We need to be in community. We need to be a part of each other's lives. And I think it's difficult to fully experience that and fully utilize the gifts that you've been given by the Holy Spirit of God to be used to edify other believers and encourage one another and bear one another's burdens. It's difficult to contain all of that just online. So as we get ready, that's just something that's been in the back of my mind. How can we strike that balance to still encourage in-person fellowship again, not at, and online ministry as well, and not at the expense of each other.
Great point. Robert, do you feel that as we return to our congregations, as we return to being with one another, do you feel, this might be a loaded question, do you feel like it'll be different than it was before? Do you feel like we need to relearn what it's like to be with each other?
That's a great question. And right away, my mind goes back to last summer, when the COVID rates were very down in New York, and we were able to get together outdoors as a congregation for some services. And I remember seeing for the first time a dear brother, wonderful Jewish believer, good friend, and he's very introverted, and he's always been a part of our congregation. And we finally see each other for the first time, and I have never heard him talk so much. It's like he was so excited to be face to face with other people again. I was like, man, who is this guy?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's certainly going to be an adjustment period for everybody.
Yeah.
But honestly, I'm looking forward to it. Whatever it's going to be like, I'm looking forward to it.
That's great.
Abe, hearing all this, I know we put out a lot of video ads on Facebook and YouTube over the past few years. How are online ads similar to and maybe different from pamphleting?
It's a great question. They're pretty much like distant cousins. One, I don't think one is greater than the other. They both have their different purposes. So if you're handing out pamphlets, nothing can really replace face-to-face ministry. Just like that interaction of being there face-to-face with a person, and engaging them, seeing who you're talking to, that is an awesome experience. So in particular, when we're reaching the ultra-Orthodox, let's say in Brooklyn, that's a very, very tight-knit community. And if one of them were maybe to be caught talking to someone at a book table, let's say, that would be a problem for them in particular. But, something that we're finding that the ultra-Orthodox are doing is browsing the internet. They're looking at YouTube. They're on Facebook. And so it's a little bit safer for them to watch a video or look at a Facebook ad or a YouTube ad than it is to speak to someone face to face. So I think there are different methods that can be used at the same time, and again, it's not one or the other. It's just how we're using it. And so I think that's just been the benefit, particularly in Jewish ministry, where just the thought of believing in Jesus is so controversial for Jewish people, and they can't even talk to their family about it because they will just either be disowned or kicked out or whatever. Jewish people don't want others in their family to know that they're seeking. So that's really where the digital side of things comes in. And I believe that's why we're seeing so much success on the digital side, because we're able to kind of penetrate physical walls. We're able to actually meet people in their homes,
for sure,
as opposed to waiting for them to leave the home to speak to them. And I just think it's been really awesome, watching how we've advanced over the years in the digital advertising space.
Yeah. And Abe, I remember maybe about 2 years ago where we ran a little test with the Jesus film, with a clip from the Jesus film in Yiddish. And we ran a test on Facebook, right? Can you share a little bit about that? Because I remember hearing the results of how many people watched that video.
Yeah, we ran this test 2 years ago. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I do know that it was hundreds of people who watched the video. Now, everyone listening is probably saying hundreds of viewers. That's nothing. Well, listen to what we did. We targeted zip codes that we knew were majority ultra-Orthodox. We also ran the ad in Hebrew. We ran it in Yiddish, actually. We ran it in Yiddish, targeting Hebrew speakers, because most of them know Hebrew and probably have their Facebook pages in Hebrew. So we know that people who watched the majority of the film understood Yiddish because the film was in Yiddish. Yes. And so that tells us that Yiddish speakers in an area where there's ultra-Orthodox watch the film, 1 + 1 = 2. Ultra-Orthodox were watching the Jesus film. And that was incredibly encouraging. And so we're taking that data and we're coming up with some plans on how we can expand on that and continue to reach in the digital space.
Those hundreds are so exciting because whenever we do anything online in English, we know as a team that we're probably going to get 10 to 20 times the response from English-speaking believers in Jesus than we will from Jewish people who don't yet believe in Jesus. Well, how many believers in Jesus know Yiddish or Hebrew and are watching a Yiddish language version of the Jesus film? I mean, this is such an exciting thing that those hundreds, those are probably the vast majority, if not all of them, not yet believing in Jesus. And so that is a very effective campaign to reach them with the message of Jesus.
So now imagine, if you're driving a van through an ultra-Orthodox community trying to play the Jesus film, that might not go too well. I think you'll upset a lot of people, and we always want to bring the gospel with respect. Mm-hmm. But if we are instead providing that over, let's say, Facebook or YouTube, now this speaks it back into the anonymity of the web, right? And we always say this, what Satan is using to intend for destruction, God is using for his glory and for his edification. Mm-hmm. And so that anonymity, though it can be a little dark for depending on how you're using the internet, we're finding that it's helping spread the gospel. And so that's just very encouraging.
Yeah, I found in 9 years in being on the ground in Brooklyn, just my heart being broken because of my inability to really figure out how to have a sustainable face-to-face ministry with the ultra-Orthodox. And I, just like you said, Abe, I am very excited and passionate about using the internet to reach the unreached, to penetrate those walls that those sociological barriers, those barriers that we just can't get through with the gospel. The Lord is giving us new means, primarily through the internet. There are other ways as well, but we're really seeing that the internet is a very strategic means to reach the unreached.
Yeah. And Brian, I remember going back again to the Isaiah 53 campaign and sort of observing and watching how the Lord was working in your life in particular, and really using that whole campaign as a transition for our ministry going more digital, but also for you in particular. Do you want to share a little bit about how the Isaiah 53 campaign and the online forum that was on the website, how that fits into your story and what you're doing now?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. It was a huge, huge part of my story. So as part of the Isaiah 53 campaign, we decided that we wanted to have some kind of online presence. Well, up to that point, we hadn't. This was 2013. We didn't really have much of an online presence before that, and we definitely weren't running social media campaigns. So we decided to buy Isaiah53.com, and we installed a discussion forum as a section on the site, and that enabled anybody, but primarily unbelieving Jewish people, to register an account and to respond to different questions and answers that were posted on the site. And I was one of several staff members who was tapped to be a responder on that discussion forum. And after a month or two of the 5 of us being on the site, the other 4 weren't that interested in internet forum ministry. And that was what was getting me up every single morning. I just wanted to get up. I wanted to get on that forum. I wanted to see who was responding to me, what their objections were. If I didn't know how to respond, I was going and researching, and then I'm writing all these posts, and I absolutely loved it. My passion for online evangelism and apologetics was really birthed out of administering and writing on that discussion forum. And that became my primary ministry for about 2.5 years. and just absolutely loved it.
So tell us why did that end? Why did that forum eventually come to a halt, and how did that transition to what you're doing now?
Yeah, so the forum was really great in that it enabled us, or me in particular, as the only Chosen People staff member administering it. It enabled me to respond to Jewish objections to the gospel and to make positive cases for why Jesus was the Messiah. But I was the only staff member who was really on the forum. And there were other users, Messianic Jewish and Christian users, who helped me some. But there were so many Jewish users on the site, and many of them would write like crazy, or they would copy and paste things from other places on the internet. They would go off topic. They wouldn't respond to the original post. They would try to hijack the post. And basically the forum was not designed to have a good control system for keeping the messages on topic and to actually have a conducive atmosphere. A lot of discussion forums, they're built around the entire audience having a common love, a common theme. You know, you got a car forum, or you got a technology forum. It brings together people with a common interest. Well, the discussion forum on Isaiah53.com, it brought together believers and unbelievers in Yeshua, and there was not commonality, and it brought out a lot of bad things actually on both sides. And it was not a very productive way or sustainable way of online evangelism. Even though I loved doing it, I knew that there was a better way to go about online ministry.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because we're seeing some of that energy kind of in our Facebook comments, not so much Instagram, but really Facebook, where we have to monitor kind of those conversations that are happening between believers and unbelievers. And you know, I think if there's anything that people hear today, it's just, again, share the gospel in love. If you disagree with someone on social media, do it in love. You know, you never know who's watching, and they're going to see that and think you represent all Christians, right?
Right.
And so it's just so important to do all of that in love. And speaking of social media, and Brian, we'll come back to your current project in a little bit. Nicole, so we were actually talking about pamphlets before, right?
Yes.
And handing out flyers and things like that. And I see social media, social posts, Instagram posts, Facebook posts, kind of like those pamphlets getting passed around, right? So social media really started picking up for us, I would say around 2014, but in the last couple of years, it's really blossomed into something wonderful and a really great communication tool. So how are we using platforms like Facebook and Instagram to reach Jewish people and also Christians? Because part of our mission statement is to encourage believers to pray for, evangelize, disciple, and serve the Jewish people as well.
Yeah, so it's definitely a dual function for sure. We do get some pre-believing Jewish people on our social media accounts, in our comment sections, and their comments range from, curiosity to sometimes they don't like what we're doing. And so we try to just give everybody the freedom to say what they want to say, as long as, like Brian said, as long as they're not hijacking the conversation. And sometimes even the believers, sometimes even Gentile Christians will hijack the conversation, and, it becomes a very personal thing. And so we have to kind of tone down those comments. But most of the time, people are pretty respectful. And what I like about what we do with social media is that we get to show the Jewishness of Jesus to our audience. We're educating the church about the Jewish roots of the faith, but we're also letting Jewish people know that Jesus was Jewish and that, he is their Messiah. We get to tell people about Israel's role in the Bible and how important that is today. We also get to do online events as well on our social media platforms. So it's just been great to see the response that we've been getting. And we also get to educate people about anti-Semitism within church history as well as today. And I think the Jewish community really appreciates the fact that even though we're a ministry, we take a stand against anti-Semitism, and we want to support the Jewish community, whether they're believers or unbelievers.
One thing I really appreciate so much about the social media posts, and Nicole, you do such a wonderful job. I just want to make sure that we all acknowledge that and say that.
You beat me to it.
But one thing I love is how they are really such a good tool to drive people or to invite people to some of our other websites, like ifoundshalom.com, or even, again, what the project that Brian is working on.
What I love about Messiah.com, I feel like it's like our savvy older brother who like knows everything. And there's so many great articles on that website, and you really keep it up to date. So yeah, Brian, tell us a little bit more about Messiah and about Chosen People Answers.
Yeah, so About Messiah and Chosen People Answers are cousin sites. They both have the same purpose of sharing the gospel, evangelizing Jewish people, and dealing with objections to believing in Jesus, but from two different angles. The AboutMessiah.com site is for Jewish people who are curious about Jesus. Maybe they've heard that he has this Hebrew name, Yeshua. Maybe they have a Christian friend that has been inviting them to church, but they don't really know if that's okay for them to go to church because they're Jewish, but they've got this curiosity. And so AboutMessiah.com is for Jewish seekers, answering very down-to-earth questions about what it means to be a Jewish believer in Jesus. And we're trying to build AboutMessiah.com into being an online library of a vast majority of different articles on different topics. And so that site is going to be growing. And I would encourage you to go there and to check it out and to see the approach that we're taking with Jewish people, the tone that we're taking, and to apply that in your own evangelism. Yeah. And then Chosen People Answers, that is for Jewish people who want to think through the issues maybe a little bit deeper. Maybe they are a little bit more hostile to the idea of Jesus being the Messiah, have more questions. They want to go into the history. They want to go into the Hebrew. And so Chosen People Answers goes more in depth on very similar topics.
So maybe we have a prophet or two here. What do we think will be the next new type of media that we will use for ministry? What's next?
Holograms.
TikTok.
I was going to say cryptocurrency somehow.
Virtual reality.
Yeah.
VR messianic services with dancing.
There you go.
Yeah.
Virtual reality tours in Israel follow Jesus' footsteps.
I think the prophecy is strong.
We're giving people too many ideas.
Yeah.
We should keep some of these for ourselves.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So how do we come up with fresh ideas for sharing our message? How do we avoid trying to replicate what others are doing? What would you say, maybe somebody who's listening is into digital media for their ministry or for their organization, whoever. What is it that we can do to come up with like a fresh new idea for communicating that your mission statement, or in our case, our message?
Invite the young people to the table. That's, one thing that I've noticed. And I've had the privilege of being a part of Camp Kesher for like the past 6 or 7 years now. And I think there's even studies about this, but middle schoolers, like 10, 11, 12-year-olds are at the forefront of the latest trends.
Right.
It's just, it's how it is. So I think it all goes back to what we've been talking about: being open, being flexible, pliable, being willing to think outside the box. And I mean, one example that comes to mind is one of our younger Israeli staff members has developed a gaming channel where he shares the gospel as he's on there on Twitch, playing these video games. And this is like a big trend among young people right now, especially Gen Z, where they'll go online and they'll watch other people play video games. So as he's on there, he's engaging with the people who are chatting and asking him questions, and he's sharing the gospel through gaming online.
I miss my calling. I should have done that.
Yeah, but I mean, who would have thought that would be an effective means of ministry?
That's awesome. It's funny because my 10-year-old niece, I tend to ask her what technology she's into and things like that, just to get an idea of where things are headed. Mm-hmm. And the other day she told me she lost interest in TikTok. And meanwhile, she was using TikTok like crazy for the whole year.
Wow.
And now she's lost interest. And I'm like,
something's coming. What's next?
Yeah, what's next?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, listening to the young people is huge, Robert. And I would also agree that you need to surround yourself, not just with young people, but just people who are always thinking outside of the box. They're not content with the status quo. They're always convinced that there's more for the Lord to be doing in our midst, that what has happened in the past is not necessarily what we are limited to for the future, and not throwing water on the little embers of little ideas that could be fanned into flame. Again, you've always got the skeptics who say, we've never done it that way before. And they see it as too risky. And so then that doesn't encourage risk-taking for the Lord. And sometimes the greatest ministries come about because someone has a crazy idea that nobody believes in, and then it just works.
That's so true. I mean, we're seeing that now. 10 years ago, I don't think there was much interest in a digital media team and what we're doing. And now it's become a huge pillar in our ministry. And so, yeah, that's totally true. So kind of as we wrap up, what advice would you all give to other ministry content creators in your field?
I would say you have to pray. It's so crucial. And just a brief anecdote, I went through a season shortly after I first started, because when I first started, I didn't have any prior experience in graphic design. I didn't know a good photo from a bad photo. I had no discernment in these things. And so our Instagram account, if you scroll down, you'll see the demarcation line from
don't scroll down, guys. Don't scroll down.
Before the awakening and after. And I remember it was a very frustrating season, and I journaled during this time, and it was a spiritual warfare matter for me. And no matter how many times Abe tried to explain what he was thinking of, I was not connecting the dots in my head. And I thought, why can't I get it? And it was so frustrating, and I was so down on myself. And then I realized I hadn't surrendered my work process to God. You know, I wasn't reading and praying consistently. And when I was reading and praying, it was like, okay, I'm going to read a few verses and say a quick prayer, and that'll be it. And, you know, I was working, but not really making, you know, God a priority. And so God showed me during that season that I need to rest, and also I need to make time for him. And if I seek him first and his kingdom, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, right? And all these things will be added unto you. And so when I made it a priority to seek him first, to pray, to surrender the work process to him, to rely on his strength instead of my own, to abide in him because he's the vine and we're the branches, and apart from him we can do nothing. You know, once I realized all that, that's when my work started to blossom and started to move in new directions. And, you know, I finally, like, the light bulb clicked on, and I was able to start conceptualizing visually the things I didn't know before.
I remember that. It was almost like overnight. You know, that shift happened. And granted, you know, people might say, oh, does this stuff have to be absolutely gorgeous? Or no, it doesn't. But I think it definitely helps in communicating what we're trying to communicate, and being intentional about what you're posting and the themes behind it. It helps, you know, it helps in that communication. Like, you know, you're not going to think about music. You know, music that gets published isn't unfinished. You know, it's ready to be published. And I remember when your work finally got to a point where it was like, this is great. You know, I'm putting every ounce of me into this. And I think that's so important as content creators, especially in ministry, that you put every ounce of yourself into it, while also what Nicole's saying is just praying and handing it over to God and allowing him to work through you in that process. So that's great, Nicole. That's really cool.
Yeah, so even though we've been talking this whole episode about innovation and using new methods to share the gospel, and especially on the internet, I think it's really important for content creators to not forget the past, to not forget that human nature has not changed, that the same message of grace that has been effective in sharing the gospel with Jewish people and Gentiles in the past, in centuries prior, is still effective and used by the Holy Spirit today. And so I really think that there's a lot of value in taking the old wine and putting it into new wineskins, and reading biographies of people in the past and how they have ministered to the people in their context, and then attempt to apply that to your own content creation process, maybe drawing themes, drawing inspiration from things that worked in their ministry, and make it new, make it your own, put a new spin on it, but it's the same message.
That's awesome. And I just that reminded me of just, new technologies. Every single generation, when Morse code was first created, one of the first, or actually the first message that was sent over Morse code was numbers 2323. And, the gospel is just, it's everywhere, when new technology comes, people find ways to share the gospel through that piece of technology. And that's just so encouraging to hear.
And I love how numbers 2323 is, it's actually kind of funny. It says it's talking about divination in Israel, and it asks the question, what has God wrought? And you can just imagine those first people communicating on Morse code, using electricity to send these dots and these lines over the phone lines to somewhere, who knows where else. What has God wrought? How is this even possible that we can be sharing a message through this medium? And yet that is the way that we are supposed to share the gospel. We are supposed to use every means possible to share the gospel, no matter if it's Morse code over a telephone line or the internet, or still the traditional way of meeting people out on the street, going door to door, talking face to face.
Well, Brian, Robert, Nicole, thank you so much for talking with me. This is a longer episode, but it doesn't feel long. It's such an exciting conversation, and I hope others are inspired. And I also want to just give a shout out to Grace, who is our co-producer behind the quote-unquote glass on Zoom. And she is a rock star putting together these episodes. And Grace, just say a quick hello so people can hear your voice.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, thanks so much, Abe, for calling me out.
Awesome. So Grace puts together these episodes and our videos, and she is just such a critical piece to our ministry in communicating the gospel digitally. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Abe. And Mazel Tov on episode number 50.
Thank you. Each one of us has unique gifts from God that we can offer up in service to Him, and with modern technology, we now have new tools at our fingertips to help us share the message of Messiah with the chosen people. But in all of this, it is important to remember that God ultimately does the work, and we are His vessels. And even with all this technology, nothing quite beats sharing this message with a friend, face to face, through our actions as well as with our words. Thank you for listening to this season of Our Hope Podcast. We hope you enjoyed our 50th episode, and we cannot wait to share with you what God has in store for next season, so stay tuned. This episode of Our Hope Podcast was brought to you by Dr. Mitch Glazer, Brian Crawford, Robert Walter, Grace Sui, Nicole Vaca, Kyron Bautista, and Neil Saraski. I'm Abe Vasquez. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Our Hope. If you like our show and want to know more, check out ourhopepodcast.com or chosenpeople.com. See you next time.